Hello, my name is Al Benzing, Commemorative Air Force B-29 B-24 Squadron, and I'm here to present a webinar on training and checkout in our B-29 Superfortress FIFI. I have a few slides here to help us go through this, and the first one really gets into the size of the aircraft. We have thousands of pictures of FIFI, but it's a large aircraft, and for someone that's not used to flying an aircraft of this size, that's one of the hurdles they have to overcome. B-29 is an experimental category aircraft, so rather than having a type rating, you receive an experimental authorization. It is a challenging checkout. The check ride is with an FAA DPE or designated pilot examiner. It requires a significant amount of preparation and study. You have to have good airmanship, you got to be competent flying instruments, and as well as having gained quite a bit of experience as a B-29 co-pilot. All those come together for you. You'll go through the checkout without any real difficulties. Because it's a large aircraft, it's important that you understand the idiosyncrasies of it and how this airplane must be handled. And you have to master those before you get into emergencies, engine out procedures, and so on. It's 110,000 pounds at the weights that we fly it. During the war, it was much more. It's over 8,000 horsepower out there on the wings, burning 400 gallons an hour. Flight controls are cable driven only. There's no boost, and so that presents its own set of challenges. There's no nose wheel steering, so ground maneuvering can be a difficult thing. And it has a very complex electrical system, 4 batteries and 7 generators, just as an example. So here's a cute little picture of, guess what, a check ride for an aircraft commander. So we see a lot of squiggles and turns and so on, and circles around airports, and that represents air work, approaches, and so on. But it doesn't really give you the flavor for engine out, 2 engine out, and that sort of thing. But we'll get into that. I'd like to point out that in one of the interesting features of an aircraft like this is that the flight controls are fabric covered. Both the ailerons, elevators, and rudder are fabric covered. And in 2016, we had the volunteers within our group recovered the fabric on the rudders. And so we developed part of our fundraising program, a method of creating a plaque that has a piece of this fabric from the rudder. So just a moment here to mention that you can acquire that by going to CAF B29B24.org and making a donation. I believe it's $129 to be eligible to receive this plaque and a certificate of authenticity. And along with that, we are still making available the Reign of Fire book. And of course, this edition is very special to our squadron. We were able to get a FIFI 75th birthday edition, and it has a forward in there and history about our aircraft and the timeline while it was with the Army Air Corps or U.S. Air Force. So it's a great book by Charles Phillips, and if you haven't already ordered, we appreciate your support in ordering that book as well. Now, into the flying. First, you have to get into the books, right? There's always ground school before flying, and that includes CAF online courses, the B-29 ground school, and written tests, and so on. So we have some manuals. So we've got a squadron manual with policies and procedures, and my, it just goes on and on. And then we get into things like normal checklists, emergency checklists, and because it's an experimental aircraft, we also have operating limitations specific to this airplane. Digging a little deeper into the manuals and so on, we have crew duties that are spelled out. We have crew call-outs, which are required and are stated at certain points within the flight. And then we have landing profiles, takeoff profiles, maneuver profiles, which again are to be followed as part of our standardization and procedures. The aircraft flight manual, or was known as a flight handbook, contains a wealth of information. It's been updated and it's specific to our aircraft now, but it includes the description of all of the systems in the aircraft and normal procedures, emergency procedures, and so on. So it contains a great deal of information. We go into ground school, we start out by going to the online courses. There are FAA regulations, of course, but we also have CAF regulations and information on ride flights that we do. Here's a quick example of what our ground school schedule looked like. Each line of this is an hour or so, or at least a half hour, and it's a PowerPoint or a video or a group discussion, and that covers the better part of 2 days. So it's about 16 hours or so of required ground school, in addition to the online stuff, in addition to the pre-study that's required. So there's a great deal to it. And much of this, of course, is required by all the pilots, not just the aircraft commanders that are checking out. So once you do all of that and you're ready to go fly, we have a couple of other things that are useful everyday flight or in training. One we call our QREF, or quick reference. Contains limitations, profiles, excerpts from the manual that are most often used. It's about a 20-page document that's pretty handy to just brush up on things as you go. The other is a recent document written by Al Harum as he went through this procedure to become an aircraft commander and his check ride. He sat down after his check ride and wrote up a very detailed set of his thoughts and processes for each of the maneuvers. And it's a very, very useful document. I'll touch on it a little more in detail a little further on. Hey, we're in the airplane finally. So this is what it looks like out the front window where I get to sit sometimes. And this is where the new aircraft commander will sit, or during training as well. We have a lot of windows, but we also have a lot of window frames. And seeing out well is a challenge at times, particularly in takeoff and landing. Here I happen to be a picture of me flying along on a ride flight. And the reason I chose this picture is it shows the throttles over here on the side. And notice I don't have my hand on them. Here's another picture of the throttles, a little bit better view of the trim, wheels, as well as the throttles. The flight engineer is normally handling the engines. This is the center console where we have emergency brakes, feather buttons. Instead of a gear handle, you just have a guarded gear switch. And we have a flap switch and an emergency flap switch. And here's our radio stack. Flight engineer station. This is where everything is done that has to do with operating the engines and systems. So he has quite a number of engine instruments here, as you can see. And on the bottom end, he's got the generators and so on. Over here are magnetos, fire bottles, and on and on. Just below that is the switch panel for the flight engineer. So he has starters and generators and fuel shutoffs and so on. He also has the throttles and the mixtures. And here are the propeller controls, which are just toggle switches. But again, the flight engineer is handling engines throughout the vast majority of the flight. So we talk about training maneuvers. I'll just make the point that I've split this up into 2 training flights to cover all of the information. And that's kind of the way that I did it in training the last couple of guys. You don't want to overwhelm and wear somebody out. You would like them to be able to do things in groups that make sense and that aren't too tiring. So on a training flight 1, for example, we're just talking about ground operations. There's no nose wheel steering, so it's not trivial. Takeoff, and then we do air work, steep turns, How does that work when you're looking out that nose? It's a little challenging. Stall series, clean takeoff and landings. Huge aircraft. You can have a lot of asymmetric thrust if you're not careful. You got to have the ball in the center for any stall. And, you know, you've got to treat this aircraft with a great deal of respect when you're getting very slow. And you have a lot of power out there capable of being brought into the mix. Unusual attitudes are some along the same line. You don't want to take a large aircraft and just be wrapping it around. You got to be careful. And emergency descents as well. You have engine limitations to think about. You can't just pull the power all the way off. Also within the first flight, we'll talk about more or less normal landings. We will come in on an overhead approach to fit our profile for landing and do a 35-degree landing to a full stop. That is, 35 degrees is one of the allowable flap settings, the other being 45. So if you have enough runway that you can be a little bit faster, that's acceptable. So we do an aborted takeoff, just to do this procedurally. We do a takeoff and stay in the pattern using a pattern checklist. And then instead of landing, we end up doing a go around. So full flaps in a go around. It's a handful unless you really have the procedure down clearly and are able to go through that as you should. And then we come around and do a full stop landing with 45 degrees. All right, so on the second flight we might do, obviously you do your normal or crosswind takeoff. Now we're going to get into instrument approaches, abnormal flaps, engine out, and so on. So we start out with vectors to a non-precision approach, such as a localizer, 15-degree flap landing. There you have the concern of, can you get slowed down enough without having the drag that you normally have with flaps? What about the pitch of the nose on landing? It's a very long aircraft, 99 feet long, and if you pitch up very much, you're going to have a tail strike. So a bit of a challenge. You know, then we come around, do another takeoff, and as we're coming up for vectors for the approach, we'll have an engine failure to allow you to shoot the ILS and do a 3-engine go around at decision altitude. Again, procedure is extremely important. Airmanship's extremely important in order to handle this aircraft in that kind of an environment. And of course, having the correct speeds is critical. Then we fly a pattern and do after the 3-engine go around, we come around and we do a full stop landing with 3 engines. Do another takeoff. This time we'll lose an engine. We don't do V1 cuts. We're not required to do it. It would be very dangerous to do. But at 400 feet and above, you can fail an engine, simulated. And so we do that. And then on downwind, we could fail a second engine, which would set us up for a 2-engine landing. Procedure, 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 keep your speed up, and so on, is what makes that a success. So let's talk a little more detail about profiles. Here we have a takeoff profile, and the idea is that this graphically represents the different elements and the sequence in which they occur. Like we could talk here about, you know, allow it to fly off at 125 to 130 miles per hour. VMC is 125, so that becomes important. Once you're airborne, tap the brakes, then call gear up. At 150, you can call flaps up. And somewhere in there, you'll call climb 1 for a reduced power. And once you're accelerating to about 190, you might call for climb 2 as an example of a takeoff profile. This allows us to ensure we get the best performance out of the aircraft and that we have it standardized, and that makes it safe. So here we're going to see a bird's eye view, so to speak, of a takeoff. This is from a GoPro on the bottom gun turret in the aft of the aircraft. I've got the noise turned down a bit. I'll just point out that we have about 15 degrees of flaps. So we get a view of that. Just steering with power. We can't tap brakes and we don't have steering. It's working out pretty well on this one. You see the center line and we see the nose gear come off. There we go. And soon we're airborne, positive rate, tap, 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 push on the brakes, and the gear will start to come up. We don't get very high. You can see that from the shadow. Why? Because we want to accelerate and get enough speed so if you do have an engine problem, that you have rudder authority to handle it. And then very soon now you start to see the flaps coming up as we exceed 150 miles an hour. And the gear continues to come up. So it's a beautiful countryside. You can see we're still not very high, and we'll start to climb a little bit here in a moment. Okay, so that's almost surreal, a very serene takeoff. Well, in reality, inside the cockpit, it's a little bit different, and we'll get into that here in just a second. If we take a look at the takeoff profile that's in our flight manual and the procedures, you can see that there's a lot there. And again, this follows the graphical profile, and it looks a little complicated. Well, guess what? There are six crew members taking part in this takeoff. So here's what it's like described in the training guide. A little bit different layout, but Al Harum had gone through this and described it just in a matter-of-fact way, exactly what you're going to be doing at different times. So he describes a VFR overhead arrival, an all-engine IFR approach, how to set it up, when to slow down. It follows the profile, but it has a bit more detail, and it's done very much matter of fact how you would proceed with this. And then he took another excerpt out of this. We get into the very complicated two-engine landing and the things that are important, how to give yourself some margin for error, the importance of keeping your speed up and conserving your altitude and so on, and various notes along those lines. So this is a document that's very, very useful for the new people in particular that are going through the training. So here's what an actual takeoff looks like from inside the cockpit. You'll see a lot of communication going on between pilots, flight engineer, and other crew members.
59 Bell Rig, takeoff 16, like to go northwest. Now call your base turn. Roger, control in 3 Whiskey. Superfortress 529 Bravo, E2 Tower. Fly runway heading runway 16, clear for takeoff. Wind 190 at 10. Let's take off 16 and fly runway heading for 529 Bell. 5 Romeo out.
Okay, roll the line.
No departure.
Roll the line. Windows, doors, and hatches. Close on the left. Close on the right. Close the back. Transponders on set. Strobes and lights I'll get for you. They're on. Heat. On. Just stand by there for 1 second.
Turn base.
Okay, ready, John?
Runway 190.
Out flaps set. These folks do high fixtures.
Departing
Bridge.
Superfortress.
For takeoff checklist, we get started. Clear for the option 1, 6 blue, small 10, 3, 2. All right, Johnny, so manifold 30. Manifold 30. Pilot throttles. Engineer throttles and max power. Max power. There's 100. You're up. You're up. Left up. Left up. Climb 1. Climb 1.
All right, so in the noise you were hearing there, because of the loudness of the engines, it would break through the squelch and kind of overpower the audio system there a little bit. So you can see, in order to have this nice serene takeoff in this beautiful large aircraft, there's a lot going on. Similar to the takeoff profile, we have landing profile, where we talk about different things that are occurring at different points during the pattern. For example, we come in at 180 miles per hour at 1,500 feet. Props at 2,000 RPM, manifold 2.6. That may be the norm. We get the landing gear down at 180. That slows you some to 170. You get flaps 15. Now you're slowed to 160. You roll into the turn to base. You want to be 150 to 160. Go flaps 25. 150 on the turn to final. And you might be bringing your power back to manifold 2.4 at that point. Flaps 35, flaps 45, and so on. So again, the profile gives us sort of touchstone places along the way. What speed should I be at? What configuration? What altitude? When we look in the manual at this, there's a lot going on there. And it's simply this sequence of events and what to expect at those various points. But there is a lot going on. Beautiful countryside, nice big airplane being very graceful. 45 degrees of flaps, you can see. For 45 degrees of flaps, the pitch is down. It's a very nose down attitude. So when we flare to touch down, the nose gear is pretty close to the runway. This is a typical, a good landing, but we'll see that the nose gear is very close to touching down when the main gear touch. Okay. Then I jump forward a little bit here pretty quickly to make another point, and that is to allow you to see that the outboard engines get shut down and the props in an X form so they can pass over lower things or high things such as taxiway lights. So you can see the starter being manipulated by the flight engineer until he gets it in the X form. So as we turn off, we can take a look at the taxiway lights coming off the side here. A little hard to see, but they do stick up. In the northern airports where they have high snowbanks, they stick up all the more. So we have to be very cautious of that. Okay, so this is what a landing looks like.
We're a little faster on gear speed, manifold 2.6. Half mile to Wixie.
So that nice serene landing, this is what it looks like on the inside.
Okay, let's go gear down. Oh, touch base, gear down. Manifold 2.4. Manifold 2.4. All right, you find the ILS. Green. Okay, flaps 15. Got flaps 15. Verify 15. Flaps 25. Going to 25. Here comes your before landing checklist. Landing check, and we're going on to 9:15. Landing gear is down, 3 green and off. Hydraulic pressure. 2 normal. Wheels and brakes. Hydraulic tree line. Tailgate. Tailgate's down. Flaps 25. Hold it for manifold 2.2. Manifold 2.2. Okay, let us go.
About a half mile west of the field, midfield 1,100 jet helicopter going to be crossing west east.
Flaps 35. 35 flaps? Yeah. Verify 35. Hey, you're going down to 9:15. Okay. About 400 above.
cleared to land. After landing, protect parking.
200 bucks. After landing, after parking. Helicopter 24. Apple 24. 100 bucks.
Okay, let's go around. Number 4 engine is failed.
Okay, set max, going around, set max power. And flaps 25. Flaps 25. Keep the nose down, keep it into the engine here. Gear up. So the flaps to 15. Flaps 15. Flaps up.
All right, so we're showing a landing, and of course, we throw in a engine failure during the go-around. So you can see there's a bit involved there. And of course, this is what another depiction of what a check ride might look like, with the steep turns and stalls and all that. So I hope that gives you some idea of what's involved in the process, and hope you enjoyed it. And certainly thank you for all the support over the last few months. We've had a lot of webinars and have asked for support along the way, Books for Bombers and the Fabric and so on. So I'm very grateful for those who have responded. This will be the last webinar that we do for the fall. There may be some others to come as we get into the future. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.